Dr. Nardi here, back with another video. And in this video, we are going to talk about consciousness. We're going to try to define the term consciousness, talk about what it is, and try to get to a better consensus of it. We'll also talk about the neural basis of consciousness, or what parts of the brain are involved in consciousness. And we'll also get into some terms like sense of self and some other key terms. So with that said, stay tuned. And if you haven't done so already, please like this video, share this video, and let's get started. So I first want to talk about the neurological basis of a consciousness. And to do that, we kind of have to define or construct what we mean by consciousness. Now, this term has meant different things to different people. Some researchers talk about it as a sense of a state of awareness and focus. And I would argue that, of course, you need awareness of yourself and your surroundings to be conscious. You will also need some attention, so you need to attend to things in your environment. Short-term memory has also been associated with consciousness, so you have to be able to hold on to things in short-term and even long-term memory if we talk about the sense of self, which is very important, right? So that ties into the long-term memory piece. We have to have a sense of self, or an idea of who we are. And then we can get into the conversation of the spectrum of consciousness. Now, this ranges all the way from someone who is in a coma, to deep anesthesia, to being alert and wakefulness. So all of these are the spectrum of consciousness. And then we can even talk about altered states of consciousness, including hypnosis, trances, meditation, and even drugs that alter our consciousness. Now, there are a couple of brain structures and network explanations of consciousness that I want to briefly discuss. Some important areas of the brain are the central lateral thalamus, the anterior insular cortex, the AIC, and the anterior cingulate cortex. These all appear to be involved with consciousness. We can also talk about the Salience Network, and this is a group of brain regions that detect significant stimuli that require our attention. And included in these are the anterior insular cortex and the anterior cingulate cortex. Now, the Salience Network, again, detects significant stimuli that require attention. And just as a little FYI, this part of the brain is abnormal in individuals with some OCD, or obsessive compulsive disorder, related disorders. Now, the Salience Network switches back and forth between the default mode network, which is active when your brain is at wakeful rest, and the central executive network, which controls attention and working memory. Consciousness does not reside in these structures. They do exert their influence in cooperation with the rest of the brain. So most researchers actually will focus on these networks. And for some researchers, consciousness occurs when the activity of multiple widespread networks becomes synchronized, which enables them to share and integrate information. For example, when stimuli reach awareness, they produce widespread activity in the prefrontal and the parietal cortex. By contrast, during deep sleep, coma, or a vegetative state, or in some cases, if you have an epileptic seizure and there's a loss of consciousness, or if you go under general anesthesia, the coordinated activity among brain areas disappears, and the auditory and pain stimuli evoke limited activity to the primary areas. Many theorists actually believe that gamma frequency oscillations greater than 30 hertz between the thalamus and the cortex not only are the most likely means of achieving this coordination, but it's also necessary for consciousness. Network synchronization occurs at mid-range gamma frequencies when a person perceives a word or recognizes an image or face, and this has been showed in multiple peer-reviewed studies. Another important component of consciousness is awareness. Now, awareness is actually another concept that is difficult to define and even study. Now, researchers have typically adopted the shorthand definition that awareness is equivalent to the content of consciousness, and they focus their attention on awareness of something, like awareness of yourself or your environment. Now, one strategy to kind of measure awareness is to monitor the brain's activity in a scanner while flashing a series of words on a screen so briefly that they are at the threshold of detectability. If a person doesn't consciously notice the word, only the visual cortex is activated. As soon as a person becomes aware of the word, the lateral prefrontal cortex and the posterior parietal cortex become activated. This may mean that the prefrontal parietal network is important to the awareness and consciousness in general. Now, we can look at individual brain damage. Brain damage to the parietal lobes may impair ability to bind the spatial, color, and movement information together into awareness of a total object. In other words, this is what we refer to as integrated perception. It's important to remember that much of our behavior is guided by processes that are outside of our awareness. A simple example would be our proprioception, or our body's ability to know where our arms and limbs are at all times without having to consciously pay attention. Like, for example, you can walk down the street without ever looking at your feet. Another important concept to talk about is attention. Now, separating attention and awareness is difficult, and in some ways it's even controversial whenever you do so. Although I will say awareness may be the content of consciousness, while attention is the process of selecting our awareness on various targets. Now, if we wanted to define attention, we would say that attention is the brain's means of allocating its limited resources by focusing on some neural inputs to the exclusion of others. Or you can say that attention is like a spotlight, and your brain will spotlight certain parts of the world that you want to focus on while ignoring other parts. Attention is also very important because it's easy to remember information we attend to, but it's much harder to recall things that we did not attend or did not pay attention to. Attention is not just a concept. It is a physiological process, and changes in attention are accompanied by changes of neural activity. When an observer attends to an object, firing synchronizes between brain areas involved. There's increases in cortical activity that are key to attention, and these are due at least partially to the modulation of activity in the thalamus, which is the gateway for sensory information to the cortex. By the way, that's excluding olfaction. attention involves many structures that may be arranged into primary networks. We have the dorsal attention network. This allocates attention under goal-directed control. And we also have the ventral attention network, and this attends to stimulus demands. We can also discuss the anterior cingulate cortex, or the ACC, which also plays an executive role in attention and enhancing some types of attention while suppressing others. The other concepts I want to talk about are self, theory of mind, and mirror neurons. Now, a sense of self requires the distinction between ourself and other selves, and arguably some understanding of other selves, or that people have their own mind, thoughts, and feelings. Now, mirror neurons may have a considerable important role in our social understanding, our sense of empathy, and the understanding of others' intentions. Now, malfunctions in the mirror neuron system is one reason suggested for autism, or individuals who are diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. One of the theories is that autistic individuals fail to develop a distinction between self and others, along with empathy and the theory of mind. Now, theory of mind is just the understanding that you have your own thoughts, feelings, and perceptions, and that other people have their own thoughts, feelings, and perceptions distinct from yours. And if you know something, that doesn't mean another person knows it, and other people might know things that you do not know. And if you'd like me to make a full video on the theory of mind, put a comment down below, and I'd be happy to do that. Now, I briefly want to talk about split brains and dissociative identity disorder, and disorders of self. Now, split brain patients often raise important questions about the self and consciousness. Now, this research has looked at individuals with a severed corpus callosum. If the person with the severed corpus callosum, and again, that's the bundle of nerve fibers that connect the two halves of the brain, is asked to use the right hand to form a specified design with colored blocks, performance is poor because the left hemisphere is not very good at spatial tasks. Sometimes the left hand, controlled by the more spatially capable right hemisphere, joins in to set the misplaced blocks correctly, and has to be restrained by the experimenter. Now, different researchers interpret these studies in different ways. At one extreme are those who believe that the major or language dominant hemisphere is the arbitrary of consciousness, and that the minor hemisphere function as the automation or non-conscious machine. At the other extreme are researchers who believe that each hemisphere is capable of consciousness, and that severing the corpus callosum divides consciousness into two selves. Now, dissociative identity disorder, formerly known as multiple personality disorder, now this condition involves shifts in consciousness and behavior that appear to be distinct personalities or selves. Now, there has been a dramatic increase in the total diagnosed cases from 500 in 1979 to 5,000 in 1985. Now, this led to questions about the legitimacy of the disorder. These numbers may have been due to the over-diagnosis by therapists and fabrications by patients who were eager to please their therapists, explaining their troubling behavior or avoiding prosecution. Now, there is some limited objective evidence for identities in the brain function. Dissociative identity patients may have a neutral identity, which copes with life by inhibiting memories of traumatic past and at least one traumatic identity which has access to those memories and responds to them. Now, the researchers choose traumatic memories as their way of evoking brain responses because it's virtually impossible to find a dissociative identity patient without a history of childhood onset post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. In fact, many researchers and psychiatrists consider dissociative identity disorder to be a severe form of post-traumatic stress disorder. Well, that is it for this video. Please like, subscribe, and share this video, and I will see you all next time. Take care. Bye-bye.